Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. I'm your host, Thom Jennings. Thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. We've something a little different today. This will be more of a storytelling format, and my hope is that you'll get something out of it. It's, I guess, for lack of a better term, a cautionary tale. Now, just a little bit of background. I, as some people who may know me, they know that one of my part-time vocations is as a journalist, mostly covering music, but a long time ago, I worked on this project when I was in college, and I was a little bit older when I went to college, and I had part of it was doing interviews with people, and I learned how to record phone calls and conversations and all those types of things. And as I've gotten older, I've been burned many times, and so because of that, I've recorded my fair share of phone calls. And on some level, they have served me well, and on other levels, they have just been like maybe a document to something that I really wish I could forget. So today's episode, which I will assume is part one of this cautionary tale, began with this phone call. We'll go ahead and play it, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Get back to you about the interviews.
Yeah.
I did want to let you know that I did offer it to a different candidate, and they did accept it.
Okay.
I wanted to let you know. I mean, I'm open for questions. You want to talk about the interview? You want to think about it a little bit and get back to me? I just wanted to let you know that I'm more than happy to talk about it.
Now, right there, the person on the other end of the phone said, "I'm more than happy to talk about it." And anybody that has been in a situation where somebody says, "I'm more than happy to talk about it," may be smarter than I am and realize that that is code words for, I really don't want to talk about it. Person on the phone, a woman named Stephanie. She was my former boss when I worked at Hillside. And this phone call was about a lateral transfer. It wasn't even a promotion. So I was living in Orleans County in New York State. And I worked in an adjoining county as a social worker. And they had a position open up in Orleans County, which was literally would take my 45-minute to an hour commute and turn it into a 45-second commute. It would have been working in the same community that I lived in. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll get to when it comes to this stuff. But I was basically, sent along this bunny trail in terms of posting for it. Now, in most cases in this agency, a lateral transfer just meant if there was a position open, typically they'd give it to the person with the seniority, or maybe they'd give it to somebody that had, the better qualifications and whatnot. But very rarely do you have a situation where you're transferring from one place to another, doing the same job, where you have to apply for the same job that you're doing and then interview for the exact same job that you're doing. But that's exactly what happened. So what she did is it was a bit of a kangaroo court, in my opinion. So, but she was working with someone in her office, and she was in the office in Batavia, New York, which was, I'm not going to get into the geography if you want to look it up, but basically Batavia was a centrally located area, actually not far from where I live right now. And there was a young lady that she worked with that was doing the job that was actually one step below the job that all the rest of us that applied for this position were doing. Now, Stephanie, we all knew that Stephanie really, really liked this employee and that eventually she was going to give the job to this employee. And I probably should have just accepted that. But unfortunately, I did not. So here's what happened next.
If you're interested, but I also know I don't want to force you to. I don't want to belabor it either, and I want to make sure that you heard directly from me. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, so the interview was the deciding factor. Is that how that worked?
No. But if you had specific questions, I can't talk about other people's interviews. I can only talk about yours with you. That's what I mean. That the decision this decision was based on a lot of information, and it was a tough decision because I had 4 people with varied strengths and abilities, and the person I picked, I believe, was the one that fit the needs of the program and the families, and also, our team the best. So it was not an easy decision, Tom. But if you had specific questions about any of the questions that I asked, I just wanted to be able to offer that if that's something you had questions about.
Now, I want to pause for a moment, too, and this is an important thing because it'll come up later, and hopefully this doesn't get to be too boring for you. But Stephanie, at the time, in this phone call, we worked together for a little while, and she calls me Tom. My formal name is Thomas. This will come into play later as this whole situation kind of degenerates and turns into this crazy fiasco. But take note, there it was. She called me Tom. So let's continue with this conversation.
No, I mean, honestly, I didn't even want to do the interview. Jeff and I had spoken about it at length, and I said if we were going to have to go through a whole interview process and all that stuff, that at the end of the day, I wouldn't have pursued it. But I mean, it is what it is. But I guess I'm just kind of confused by how everything played out. But whatever.
Now, here's where I kind of messed up because I'm being more than a little bit disingenuous. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a certain bullshit factor in there that you could probably hear in the tone of my voice. Like, here I'm disappointed, and everything that I was saying was kind of I don't know if I necessarily should use the term passive aggressive. I mean, I can to a certain degree because I probably should own some of that, especially in being able to look at this in retrospect. But that was in between the lines. I was saying, hey, it is what it is. I mean, but I just don't understand why I had to go through an interview process to interview for a job that I was already doing with actually coworkers that I was working with on a regular basis. And I mean, I'm not sure how much of this conversation that I cut off. I think I cut it off at a certain point, obviously, because you don't want to listen to a 45-minute phone conversation between an employee and an employer, or a boss and a subordinate. I love that word, subordinate. But it's I don't know. You could probably tell at this point that Stephanie's gonna get real offended, and I didn't necessarily want to offend her, but I was clearly upset at how the situation was handled. And Stephanie, at that point in my career at Hillside, was a difficult boss to work with, and a lot of things that had transpired at that point that had created some tension. Now, she mentioned Jeff in the conversation, and Jeff was my immediate supervisor. He reported to Stephanie. And Stephanie, in my opinion, was... and I don't know how to phrase this other than to just say it because I'm going to sound really sexist. But Stephanie, when it came to men that she worked with, the 2 other men that were on our team that reported to her were very, I don't want to use the term feminine, but they certainly weren't masculine men. They were definitely very passive men. And I've worked for women. I'm actually, my supervisor right now is a female. And I don't have a problem working for women. I mean, the reality is I was raised by my mother. My father was on disability, so I don't have an issue with that. But Jeff, who was my direct supervisor, he created this narrative because I lived in this small town in Orleans County that I was this misogynistic, homophobic racist. And it kind of kicked around, and compared to the other 2 guys, I definitely have a little bit more of an edge to me. And I'm not a masculine man by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I don't fix cars or subscribe to a lot of those super masculine stereotypes, but I'm kind of an outspoken guy, and I feel like if somebody's wronging me, at least I used to, I don't as much anymore, due in large part to how this whole thing played out, I'll usually step back and try to, be diplomatic. And I think my attempts at diplomacy here were, if I'm trying to remove myself from the situation, which I can't really entirely remove myself, I was trying to be somewhat diplomatic, but I was also trying to say, you're full of crap, everything that you're saying. And so here's where it begins to degenerate a little bit more. And you know, this front end of this episode may be a little bit on the boring side. I kind of expect that, but it's important because I think when you get to the point where things start happening, it'll give you a better understanding of just the craziness that I was dealing with this.
No, you didn't want to interview. I'm sorry. I was not aware of that.
Yeah, no, Jeff and I, in fact, Jeff's words to me were that he wanted to, he suggested I post for it. It was really kind of an odd situation because in reality, I probably shouldn't have been able to post for it because I'm still on the performance improvement plan. And, I mean, I would have understood that. That's policy, you know, it is what it is. But when we had talked, he made these comments about how, you know, maybe it's a good idea, you know, we could split you and Tony up. And I'm just thinking, you know, whatever. I mean, I don't get it sometimes. I mean, honestly, I just kind of scratch my head. But I said, listen, dude, I'm not going to go through a whole interview. I've had an mentally exhausting last month in this program as it is with all the stuff with Pam and all that other stuff. And I just assume let a dead horse die because I'm probably not going to be real thrilled if I use my time and then nothing comes of it. And then this is exactly what happened. And I mean, that's just me being brutally honest. You know, so, I mean, you know, whatever.
Brutally honest. Now, there you go. That's we'll end there for this particular segment. And here's my words of wisdom to all of you. Nobody likes brutally honest. They really don't. There's people that say, I really wish you'd just be brutally honest with me. But to be brutally honest with all of you, when it comes to dealing with someone that's in a supervisory position, for the most part, especially somebody that has control needs or control issues, they don't want brutal honesty. What they want is compliance. They want an employee who's going to do what they're told to do. And this is really sad. It's really sad on some level because Stephanie, as a supervisor, it's really weird. I had been teaching for a while, and this guy, Jeff, that was mentioned, his position was the one that posted, and I had actually applied for that, so it would have been an assistant supervisor position. And then I didn't get that. She'd given it to Jeff, and it was another one of those situations where many of us who are in the regular workforce, they know sometimes that employers will post positions, and they already know who's going to get it. It's not really a competitive process. It's really just a formality. And unfortunately, what happens in those situations is that people will take the time to apply for a job, and then they get hurt. You know, and so that's kind of what I was saying to Stephanie, too, in this particular case, where it was like, well, yeah, obviously I would really like to have this position that was closer to home. Now, I was on this thing called the Performance Improvement Plan, which is like it's kind of a formal process where your supervisor says, you have some deficiencies at your job, and these are the things that need to improve. And if they don't prove, you know, if you don't do A, then B is going to happen and all this stuff. And then for the most part, my experience has been, and there is another phone call that I recorded that maybe I'll put some snippets in to kind of to show this too. For the most part, these performance improvement plans were kind of almost used as more of a prodding than anything else. It wasn't a situation where, I mean, I guess by design, you know, you choose language that makes things sound different than what they really are. So, for example, a corrections officer. We've heard that expression batted around. A corrections officer is somebody that is really, in essence, a prison guard. I mean, does a prison guard work with prisoners on a one-to-one basis to correct them, to help their behavior, to make them better members of society? My personal experience, I really haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of that. I mean, that may be the case with some of them, and I know people go into vocations for very different reasons, but the term corrections officer was put into place to make it sound a little less, I don't know, maybe make it sound a little more palatable. You know, this is a corrections officer. It is not a prison guard, because a prison guard has negative connotations. So, for example, in society, too, a write-up, a written warning. Now, written warning again, same thing. Ooh, look out, there's a warning. And that really has connotations of saying, okay, well, we're going to start the process of eventually figuring out a way to fire you. And the way we do that is we take these pieces of paper and we say, okay, these are the things that you're doing wrong. And if you don't correct them, we'll write you up again. And then eventually we'll fire you. And then if you go to file for unemployment, then the unemployment insurance people will say, well, you were fired because You were told 6 times that you couldn't wear red socks to work. And, they warned you once verbally, and they warned you again in written form, and they warned you again in written form. And now you have been terminated for wearing red socks. I'm not a Red Sox fan, by the way. I'm a Mets fan, but the Red Sox did lose to the Mets, so I do have a special place in my heart for them. So these performance improvement plans, what they really were is it was almost Stephanie used it originally, I think, to exert some control, because unfortunately the situation with Jeff and I, it goes back to what I'd kind of hinted at, is that Jeff had at one point really, really fractured our relationship beyond repair. And so he pulled me into his office. We were working with a client who was transgender, and this is 2015. So in 2015, today it's like transgender, it's not that big of a deal. Back in 2015, it was still kind of a big deal. And this particular client was born a male and transitioned to female, and was still with the mother of his child. And so then basically they had 2 moms, but the kid was young, and the kid was trying to deal with the emotional baggage of all this stuff. It was just very hard for the child to process. Whatever the case, we had this family get together, and all these people are in the room. And a guy says to him, hey, just out of curiosity, now that you've become transgender, does your car insurance go down? And ironically, I've used that line as part of my stand-up routine, because I think there's a little bit of social commentary packed into that. It's not meant to be disrespectful towards transgender. It's really, the joke, was, if my son came to me and said that he was transgender, I would look at him and say, well, at least we'll save a bunch of money on our car insurance. And that really has almost more to do with the fact that it's not fair that women are charged less than men, at least young women, than young men, based on these, blah, blah, blah. I think it's a discriminatory practice. There, I said it. So it got back to my supervisor through this woman, Pam, who I'd mentioned, Pam and I had problems. And Pam, she was another one. Pam was one of those weird people. We lived in the same town. We had a fair amount of mutual friends. And so I guess I was lulled into a false sense of security, thinking that her and I would get along, but we just didn't. And she was, more or less, I think, because she was friends with Jeff. But she goes to Jeff and she said that I made this ignorant comment to the transgender client that we had, and it wasn't me. And in fact, I told the guy that said it to her, I says, hey man, that's probably an inappropriate question. So let's just move on and talk about something else. And so he looks at me and he says, Jeff does. I'm sitting in his office and he goes, Tom, I heard something happen last night at the family gathering. Is there anything you'd like to tell me? And I said, I'll be honest with you. I'm really not even sure what you're talking about. And he says, look, I just want to clear the air. I know that people from your area tend to be very ultra-conservative and have issues with homosexuals. And I'm not going to say that you're racist, but certainly, that redneck mentality is just not gonna fly around here. And I looked at him, I'm like, I go, redneck mentality? I said, I go, Jeff, I wasn't born and raised in Orleans County. I said, but either way, how do how can you be a social worker and just stereotype a person like that? And so he was convinced that I made this disparaging comment to this transgender client. And this transgender client, thankfully they weren't mine. They worked with another social worker. But she just liked to cause problems. And it really has nothing to do with the status of their gender. Some people are just assholes. And you don't get a free asshole pass just because you are at the forefront of being a transgender. I mean, there's people that are transgender that are absolutely wonderful people. There's people that are transgender that are absolutely despicable scumbag human beings. It's like that with every gender. So that's kind of where we were at. I mean, it was this sort of perfect crap storm of all these things going on. And you would think that this little interview process, I have this performance improvement plan, and really the performance improvement plan had to do with my interacting with my supervisor because I was I'm better at it. But I've always had a really, really hard time hiding my disgust for people that I really, really dislike. And I suppose on some level, as more of a defense mechanism, I spend a lot less time pretending to like people that I despise. I mean, I had a situation even 8-9 months ago with a coworker at a part-time job that I work at. And I basically said, look, if I'm going to continue to work here, then this individual's just not to speak to me at all. And we don't even really exchange pleasantries. I don't, if somebody asks me my opinion on this individual, I'm very frank about it because I really do not like them. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like how they bully people. Lots of things. But anyhow, my point being is that if you feign tolerance, then eventually it's going to come and bite you. Unfortunately, sometimes when you don't feign that tolerance, so for example, in a situation with a supervisor and you just can't stand them, you're probably better off looking for a new job, I think is probably the best solution. And I really do believe that there is a point where, like, if you can't work with your supervisor, you got to go. You got to figure it out. But then the hard part is if you're living paycheck to paycheck, how does that look? You can't just up and quit your job because you got bills to pay. And that's kind of where I was at. I mean, I had this here I am. I got this supervisor that I can't stand. And then we're going to throw in a whole nother layer of craziness here. I worked directly with families and their children to assist them in obtaining services, and I counseled them, and I built relationships with them. These were children with pervasive mental health issues, and the goal of our program was to keep them in the community. And I wish, I will say that again, I wish it were as simple as the people that go into that type of work, into that field. I wish they all really, really did it because they wanted to help these families. And at this stage, I got nothing. You know what? I got nothing to gain by telling you that's why I did it. But that's the reality. I did. I really enjoyed working with the families. I really enjoyed establishing the relationships. I enjoyed helping people. So the work itself, in terms of working with the families, was kind of, it was usually very rewarding. It could be a bit gut-wrenching. I worked with one client who, her boyfriend had murdered her niece. Like, the niece was an infant. The kid was like a year old. And it was her sister's kid. And they were babysitting, and the boyfriend killed the kid, murdered it. And this girl would talk to me about how she felt conflicted because she still really loved this kid. And she was 15, 16 years old. So I was the guy that had to have the non-therapeutic, difficult conversations with her and say, I'm glad you feel. I was like the only one that she could say this to, though. She could say, you know what, I still have feelings for this guy. And I was like, you know what, I respect the fact that you can tell me that, but it's you got to know on some level it's pretty messed up because of what he did. And she's like, yeah, but that's not the guy I know. And to try to work through all of this with her was just insane. Now, the epilogue to that is long after I left Hillside. When I started working with her, she was a habitual truant. She was a heavy drug user. She was trying to deal with all the emotions that went around. I mean, all these people that are blaming her for this small child that was murdered. And she eventually graduated high school. I think probably 3 years after I worked with her. And she invited me to her graduation party. I mean, she made it through school. And her mom thanked me. And more importantly, she thanked me. Because I helped her get through a really difficult time. And sure, I got paid for it. I didn't get paid a lot. But if it was all about the money, why the hell would I go to the graduation party? I'd be like, yeah, whatever, it's a former client. And let me tell you, folks, there's a lot of people in social work, they just have this attitude that once they're done with a client, they're just done with them. I can't, I'm not that guy. I don't get it. I don't. And maybe, looking back, that was part of the disconnect with Stephanie and I, because Stephanie had this public persona. Like if she was in a room, I mean, this woman could just ooze the BS. She could make the entire universe think that she was out to change the world one child and one family at a time. But man, as soon as that door closed, it was all about billing. It was about billable hours. It was about doing this, getting the paperwork right. And it was so rare that we could have these, even my performance improvement plan, it was related to all kinds of just weird clerical stuff. It wasn't like, Thom, you're not investing time into these families and everything like that. And I'll leave you with this because I think this is definitely going to be a two-parter, and it's a very kind of an emotional topic for me, and I don't know if this is even going to be very listenable, to be honest with you. But I worked a 40-hour work week. 40 hours. Actually, back when I was doing this program, I was working probably closer to 50 hours. And over a 50-hour work week, 50, I would maybe spend 6 or 7 hours with the family. 6 or 7 hours. The rest of the time was devoted to paperwork, to billing, to documentation, to trainings, to meetings. I mean, we would have meetings about meetings. It was just insane. So we'd sit around and we'd just talk for hours. We'd be just the same thing over and over again. And but what it came down to too is, like in my case, the paperwork was just so ridiculous, and my supervisor had not been doing my job, and I'm not even sure how he wound up getting the job. I mean, I heard theories. Everyone said, "Oh, he knew somebody who knew somebody," type thing, and I don't find that unbelievable. And anybody that's ever been at any job knows that some people get jobs just because they get jobs and they know somebody, not because they're the most qualified, but because they are the most connected. And he was kind of a connected guy, so it was really the blind leading the blind. So I didn't, and you know what? I don't find tasks like paperwork and documentation and all that stuff. It doesn't thrill me. I love, when Stephanie originally interviewed me for the position, she says, "Oh, you're a writer, so you can write these wonderful narratives of, what's going on with the family." But she didn't really care about the narrative. She just wanted to make sure that if there was some kind of billing audit, that you could say, you'd come up with these goals, like John will learn to tie his shoe over the course of the next 3 months with 2 prompts, Anybody that's been in education just kind of knows that flowery language because they put it in their individual education plans. But you'd come up with these goals that they call them billable goals, skills that you want to build in these youth. And believe it or not, I did have a kid young enough that I think he was 7 that we had to, one of the skills that he had to learn was how to tie his shoe. So we were billing the government, I don't know how much money, a lot, to teach the kid how to tie his shoe. But the sad reality is that if you take a kid that probably should be in a mental institution, you put him in there, you're paying $500 a day just to house him there. Whereas our program, we would say, we'll keep them from getting hospitalized. And unfortunately, they wound up getting hospitalized a lot anyway. And you would position yourselves as saying, well, it only costs us $200 a day to give these services, these community-based services. So even if they're not effective, they're still, less than half the cost of what you would pay if this person had to go into a hospital. And New York State, by the way, has since I've stopped doing this, they've moved to this thing called what's called a health home. And my understanding of what a health home is it's where they bring services to the home so that they don't have to take them somewhere else. I mean, you're starting to see this more with nursing homes too, where people don't want to pay money to have somebody go into a nursing home. So you bring a traveling nurse to go do all the things that they would do in a nursing home. But this way you don't have to put them in the nursing home. So yeah, to kind of wrap this up, set the stage for part 2, which hopefully won't take me 2 weeks to record like it did between episodes for this one. Thanks for your patience. I really, really loved working with families. I being in the not-for-profit world is that's why you should be doing it, and that's why I was doing it. I was making a difference. I felt when I was working with a family. I hated the bureaucracy. I still hate it. I don't know. I'm kind of weird now because I guess I just turned 56 recently. I'm in my current job. I don't really establish the types of relationships with the kids that I used to. There's almost a part of me that doesn't do that because I think it's kind of like, this is going to sound really weird. It's kind of like, I look at my dogs. I have my dogs right now, and they're getting along in years, and I don't really want to adopt another dog when I lose them because I don't know if I'm going to be around. I'm 56. My dad died at 66, and most of the males in my family, they're lucky if they make it to 70 at the outset. But either way, I don't want to. It sucks to invest your time into somebody, and then you got to think about, like if I die, they'll actually care. So I kind of don't want that. Sort of like if I got a dog and then I died and nobody was there to take care of the dog, I'd be like, I'm a horrible person. So I don't know, am I the only person that thinks like that? I don't know. Maybe I am. So anyhow, part 2, we'll get into part 2, but it said everything's gonna kind of get weird and degenerate rather quickly. We'll get to hear some other stuff that I recorded, and as I don't know. I said, why do I do it? Why I do it? A lot of times I do it because I can, but I think there's also times that I record conversations with people. Part of it's paranoia. Legitimately, and I think in this case, my paranoia was well founded, as you will come to find out later. At least I hope you will. Hope you come to the same conclusion that I did, as opposed to you listening to some of these recordings and going, "Man, Tom's an asshole. He got everything he deserved." But again, it's convenience. It's something I could do. I have had the equipment to do it for years. It's getting to do a podcast. I was familiar with the audio equipment. Hopefully, the audio sounds pretty good. Usually, when I record these things, I think it does. We had a window open today, so you probably heard some trucks come through. But the dogs were quiet today, so that's all good. But yeah, so I'll wrap it up with that. Part 2, we're going to get into the consequences of being brutally honest and what can happen in a 3 to 5 minute phone call that can turn your life completely upside down. And hopefully that tantalizes you to tune in next week. But thanks for listening to the Bagel Logic podcast. Hope you enjoy this episode. I promise I'll get some guests back on over the next couple of weeks. I got some time coming off my day job. I'll probably get some recorded into the archive so I can kind of release them once a week again. I know things have kind of slowed up a little bit, but it's summertime in Western New York, folks, which means there's lots of things to do while the weather's still nice. All right, until next time, this is Thom Jennings, Bagel Logic Podcast. Love you guys. Thanks so much for listening. We'll continue this next week.